So hi everyone, I'm very excited here for Culture Focus Magazine. I'm Nikoleta Morales, and I have two great folks with me, Pauline, Fischer, and Brickson from the Blackhouse Foundation. So can you guys tell me more about the adventure that you started in terms of the entrepreneurial series, and what do you aim to achieve with those series, and what's their purpose? I did see the first episode yesterday and it was great. Whoever wants to go first.
Sure, I'll jump in. So yeah, the series was really created as a part of a conversation amongst some of the board members. So it was Jatari Turner, Carol Ann Shine, and I having a conversation along with Brickson and the Blackhouse about how we can be most helpful and impactful at this time. And what we ultimately decided was that given the uncertainty in the business right now, that our constituents might best be helped through a series of conversations with people who have been able to pivot in their careers and who've been able to wear many, many hats. And so we were having this conversation in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and this was far before, the killing of George Floyd and the social unrest and demonstrations and protests that happened as a result of that. So what we decided to do was to move forward because we thought that that question about economic empowerment and stability within the industry was still a very important one, and just layered on this topic of, in the context of what we're experiencing right now. And really, and that is about Black images and representation and access within the industry as well. And interestingly enough, they weave together really almost organically, because I think those are issues that we tend to face, whether there's a pandemic or not. And so that's how the conversation was born. And, through the platform of the Blackhouse, we thought it was a great opportunity to reach that constituency, because over the 13 years since Brickson founded the organization, that's really what, part of the mission has been. It's really to help create empowerment and provide education for the folks who participate. So, Brickson, I don't know if you have anything you might want to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Pauline. I think, our work has always been about solutions. And so in a space where we are just roiled by the activism and the glaring light that's been reflected onto the challenges of the nation, of the world, of our industry, we really wanted to give people hard and fast solutions and charges for action and sort of their own improvement and improvement of the world.
So being that you're very knowledgeable, very experienced, and you're in the midst of it all, what do you think currently are some of the most important conversations that need to take place among everyone? There's a lot of change, there's a lot of necessary things that need to happen, but of course we need to have conversations before they even start to change. So in both of your opinions, what are these conversations, whether tough conversations or not, that all of us have to start talking about and finding solutions for?
I'll jump in. I think it really is a reconciliation with our history. There's been just a consistent denial of that history and its impact on today. And so I think that embracing, as difficult and painful as it is, of that systemic history of oppression, and sitting inside of it and the discomfort of it, I think that's the core conversation that we have to have from every angle and every minority group and every gender identification space. There's so many levels that oppression and racial oppression in particular have manifested, that we have to just really become comfortable with that history and uncomfortable with denying it and its implications.
Pauline?
Yeah, I think, I think that's right. I think what Brickson is saying is that the conversation, I think, far exceeds the entertainment business, right? And as you said, it's in every facet of our lives. If I think about my piece of the world within entertainment and how that conversation manifests itself, for me, it's really in thinking about a couple things. And the first is the images and representation of Black people, to the world, right? And in some instances, unfortunately, particularly in international territories, their education and their understanding of Black Americans is really through media. And as you can see, there's not a really wide range of characters that are being portrayed in the media today. And those that are, tend to be on one end of the scale, and they're either caricatures of African Americans, or they tend to be, criminals or negative portrayals of Black people, and you don't get the full sense of the humanity that we all have in the characters that are currently being portrayed in many instances. So I think that that's one area. And then I think the other area is one where there's already conversations happening, and that is, how do we get these stories told, and who are the people that are able to tell the stories? Who are the people greenlighting these stories? Who are the executives in charge of, working on development and those kinds of things? And that is an infrastructure question, right? And so we had the conversation with Reggie yesterday, and Reggie suggested very strongly that we need to have our own distribution so that we don't have to fight with this infrastructure any longer, which I think is a really compelling conversation, and one we've had in some form over many years, but I think with much more urgency now. And that's a conversation that needs to be had. But then I think there is an established infrastructure here, and we can't necessarily ignore it. Maybe we will or won't, but I think there's a conversation, to your point, that needs to be had there as well.
What's interesting to know is now being there's so much happening. How do you think Hollywood's going to change? I mean, what are the stories that are going to be told now? How are the African Americans going to be portrayed in movies and films? And will there be more opportunities for them, do you think, now, being with the current state and the big revolution that's starting globally? I'm just wondering, do you think there's going to be any change in Hollywood, or do you think things will be hard to change?
Well, I'll jump in, Brickson. Sorry. I remain hopeful. So I think, I think it would be hard not to. So I think at least in the immediate term, you'll see that there will be more opportunity. And there's been announcements about, new directors programs, new writers programs, and a lot of the studios have pledged, tens of millions of dollars towards pipeline, initiatives and et cetera. And so I do think that there is a focus on it right now. And so what I hope that will show itself in terms of more storytellers of color being able to tell different types of stories, and more, as I mentioned before, characters that display the full range of humanity and emotion. The question really will be, and one of the things we talked about with Reggie yesterday is, what's the long-term impact, right? So I think in the short term, certainly there will be some change, and I think it's sort of incumbent on all of us to make sure that that's a long-lasting change.
And I was going to reference Reggie Hudlin's talk yesterday with Pauline, where he talked about these cycles. In the beauty of that, you move to these cycles from Black exploitation to the 90s genre to today, maybe skipping over some iterations. He commented that we, as a field of creators, with our resources, grow bigger. Right? Each iteration is bigger. But I think the challenge is where I lose hope, quite honestly, is in the space beyond just the above the line creators, right? So we can have a number of directors and writers and producers, but if you don't have folks in the department head roles who are driving significant change in the lives of craftspeople and their ability to be in this business, you can't authentically tell those stories, right? We all talk about sort of the horrific representations of Black people you see in hair and makeup. Just put it out, right? That's just a fact, right? And so these things aren't true, and they aren't representative, and they aren't right. But even beyond that is the question of, who's marketing these films? You have people in marketing roles who can then sell our content, in a resonant way with both its core audience and the possible audience. Who's in the studio system, which we already talked about? Who's on the distributor side? Who's in the exhibitor side? So there's so many spaces that need to be impacted beyond just the green light and beyond just the next director, writer, or producer. And so that is the space where I have hesitation and push to say, it's not enough just to ink some deals. You have to really transform some guilds and some unions and some lots. And some equipment companies, right? So it just goes down and down and on and on and on. And that's where I think persistent and long range change is rooted.
Wow, this is definitely some great points. And there's definitely a long road ahead. And I just want to point out for the viewers who don't know who Reggie is, it's Reginald, want to make sure I'm saying his name correctly, Reginald Hudlin, who's an Oscar-nominated producer, director, writer. I mean, he's definitely a big name in the Hollywood world, and he had some great points yesterday. And I'm sure you're going to have more speakers like him coming up and discussing. So who are some other names that you've been thinking about that you can share with us that will be part of the discussion that viewers can look forward to and hopefully listen to and learn from?
Yeah, so we don't have names we can share just yet, and I apologize for that. I certainly am happy to send you once we've gotten confirmations. You know, it's a little tricky when you send out invitations and then, you know, before you get them back. But I think what we can say, and Brickson, please feel free to chime in, but I think what we can say is that we're hoping to create a diverse schedule of speakers that will represent the full spectrum of this conversation from an entrepreneurial perspective. And what we think about with that is that people who've been able to pivot in their career, who are able to wear many hats, who've seen the business from multiple directions and can provide some insight and perspective on what we're experiencing right now. And so you can think of them as being directors, producers, writers, some actors, actresses, and we want for there to be a diverse representation of men and women. You know, we'll likely keep the series focused on Black creators at this time, kind of given the urgency of the conversation. But as with a lot of the events that we have at the Blackhouse, a lot of these issues do obviously translate to people of many races and those who support that community as well. So Brickson, I don't know if you'd add anything to that.
That's it.
Very well said. So for the folks that don't know, could you give a brief description of the history of the Blackhouse Foundation? What is the Blackhouse Foundation and why was it started in the first place?
I'll take that one. I started going to Sundance. I was in the finance business, in the investment management business. And I started going to Sundance with folks from business school. Pauline and I went to graduate school together. And so other folks were going to Sundance, sure, skiing, movies, why not? I was the only Black person in the house. And the first movie I saw at Sundance was Hustle and Flow. And people were running up and down the aisles before the credits rolled to make offers to the director for the movie. And that was magic. I went back with a friend who was in education at the time the next year, and we observed similar energy and enthusiasm. Knew Black folks were there somewhere, but didn't see them. I think Pauline was there. I never saw her in Park City that day. And so we were like, well, this is great. We're Black people. And Carol Ann Shine, that was Ryan Tarpley. Carol Ann Shine, we saw her at the Queer Lounge, which is a space for LGBTQIA+. I don't think we had that many letters back then. Folks in the community, and the Queer Lounge, Ellen Wong, had created this space for queer folks to just have a space at Sundance. And Carol, who as a producer, has produced a lot of LGBT Black content, said we should do this for Black folks. She went away, produced the second season of Noah's Ark on Logo, came back in September and said, are we doing this? And we were like, doing what? Because it's September and that's January. And sure enough, we called Pauline and Gordon Bob and DeMille Halliburton and a few other folks, Roberta Monroe. Roberta had been a shorts programmer at Sundance. DeMille was an insurance executive who was supporting independent film and film overall from the insurance perspective. Gordon Bob, an entertainment lawyer at Del Shaw Moonves. Pauline, executive at Paramount at the time. And we just rallied. And Ryan Tarpley was still in education. We raised money, wrote checks, and mounted this space on the mountain in Park City and created just a moment in a real, if you build it, they will come. 7 Black films at Sundance that first year in 2007. That's Black director, Black subject matter, up to third lead. If Danny Glover's in your movie, we're going to count it. Fast forward, 13 years through a lot of hard work and telling our story and opening doors. There were some 55 Black films at Sundance this past year. So just an arc of working at Sundance to create that space, create education in that space, and then to be a soft landing for folks who were trying to figure out how to make an entry. Have been expanded beyond, starting in 2010, to include at various points Tribeca Film Festival, Cannes, LA Film Festival when that was a thing, Toronto International Film Festival, AFI Fest. and then some partnership with IFP Film Week in various years as well.
Great. Pauline, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's a great description. I would say over the years, we've partnered with other organizations as well, Latino Real and some others. Brickson probably has better recollection of the names of those, but just that, as the organization has grown, as I mentioned, the depth and breadth of the folks that we touch has grown as well. But it's really been amazing to see that you can create a space and create an opportunity for people to come together and network and to fellowship together, and how impactful and powerful that can be, and over the entire year.
Well, I have to say this. I was at Sundance 2019 and 2020, and I attended a few of your events. I believe in 2019, there was an opera event that was really great. There was some great information. So you definitely have great events. So I urge people that are at Sundance to come check out your events and your booth, and it's really fun. So how can people get involved with the Blackhouse Foundation organization? What can they do, or is there an application? Do they just contact you if they want to know more?
Yeah, so it's evolving. So, as every organization in a COVID world evolves, so are we. And that really was the purpose of the Entrepreneur Series. It really extends the conversation that we've been having on social. So social is the most vibrant place where we're engaged: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. And on our website, those are places to really get involved in the conversation, because we're posting about the relevant issues of the day almost every day. And then Entrepreneur Series, be sure to track that, which you can learn about on our Facebook page, Instagram posts, and Twitter, and also LinkedIn. And that will be an important space for us as well. We have more concentrated programs. We'll be launching our mid-career producers lab shortly, but that will last the summer through the winter. We have a fellows program, and we're on the ground at Sundance, knock wood, for Black MFA students from around the country. And so those are sort of the entry points, smaller scale on the actual education programs that deal with direct contact with folks. Worldwide in terms of the visual and digital pieces we do. And then as you look at the festivals for 2021, we'll be looking to create a footprint in whatever way the gods allow to make sure that we're connecting people into those activities. I mean, our bread and butter is Sundance. And so we will find a way to bring Sundance in whatever form it exists to our constituency. But those on the ground spaces beyond the digital piece are the best ways to connect with us. You said if you're on the ground at Sundance, come see Blackhouse at our space. But I would say, to the degree that you can, if you haven't ever thought about going to Sundance, know that you have a home with us and with Latinx House and with, Outfest Lounge and with the various other spaces that Gold House or other organizations like Macro or the team at HBL Multicultural create that really provide an entryway in for people of color. And underrepresented groups into the landscape of the festival and independent film and content.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Some great projects ahead, and that sounds amazing. I mean, I felt like home at the Blackhouse Foundation. It was warm, great food, great folks, great info. It was awesome. So I definitely urge everyone to come check that out. And then I just want to point something that Reggie said yesterday that kind of resonated with me in the conversation, and really I don't know, I just kept thinking about it over and over again. He said something about social media, that it's the platform where you have to choose the right platform for your activism, and that social media is not always the best place because it has only a certain amount of characters for you to express it. So people don't really know what's your opinion, where you stand, and they might take it the wrong way. And he also said social media could be the devil because there's so much hatred collected in it. And I thought that was awesome because a lot of people see social media as the platform to speak up and, express their opinions, but then it turns into, excuse my language, the toilet of the internet with a lot of hatred and just misinformation. So I just want to know, what's your opinion on what he said? Do you have anything to add to that? And also, what is your personal stand, if you're willing to share with us, on the current events that have been happening with COVID and George Floyd and the protests and the riots? I mean, these past few months have been crazy for all of us globally. So just wanted to know, what's your opinion on all of that?
Yeah, that's well, I'll take the first part of it first, and I would say, I completely agree with Reggie about, social media. It is a double-edged sword, right? So it can connect people in really wonderful and fundamental ways, as Brickson talked about. That's the primary way in which the Black House reaches our constituency, right? And so we're providing information and hearing back from our community constantly, and it is actually a really beautiful thing because we're creating these connections and continuity at a time when we all can't physically be together. And so that's the beautiful side of it. I think the downside of it is, as you've described, that people can often, turn into something that unintended. And I think sometimes people are looking for fights, and sometimes I think they happen, sort of unexpectedly as well. And it's just, I think it's one of those things that we all have to figure out how to navigate. And I think that once you wade into the conversation, that's why you have to be really thoughtful about, as Reggie said, what you're saying and who you're saying it to and how you're saying it. And oftentimes these platforms don't allow for real discourse. They allow for a broadcast of information, and people try and create a conversation out of it. And it really isn't a great platform for that. I asked him about his blog, in which, he obviously, in a blog, you can create a much more detailed account of how you're thinking and how you're feeling. It's less interactive in many ways, but in other ways, it's also, one other platform where you can actually express yourself in a much more, thoughtful way as well. And so I think, people have to really think about how they want to do that and what's the best way to go about it. But I think at this moment, we all have to say something. I think the time of, sort of hiding behind, pomp and circumstance, or, I'm like, I don't think I should say something, even the actor who wrote and said he doesn't want to get pigeonholed. I think at some point we all have to figure out how to say something, and not just, how, but, you have to do something. And then switching gears, I think just in terms of what's happening right now, I know for me personally, it's been a really very challenging time. It's been hard to see what's happening going on in the world, and all of these, certainly the killing of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and it just feels like, Black people are under siege a little bit, frankly. And I know that these things have been happening for a long time, but I think it's just this concentration. And then on top of, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our community as well, it just felt like a punch to the gut. And I think it's been a real wake-up call in many ways as well, is that we have to really be vigilant about, what's happening. We have to fight for what we believe to be right. And we have to mobilize into action. And I think that is politically, I think that socially, I think that from a work perspective. And so I've been spending time trying to think about how I personally can be most effective. And part of that, the Entrepreneur Series was born, just trying to lend my voice to something like that. And I continue to think of ways in which I can personally be impactful in other areas as well. But that's kind of how it's impacted me.
I would take a little sort of slightly different position from Reggie's yesterday. I think that first, it's much harder to create than to edit. Right? Editing is very easy. Not always easy, but it's mostly easy. It's much easier than creating. And I think that, the degree to which we as artists try to focus our attention on creating, it then allows these platforms to be better angels, right? So if you're going onto social media and creating, and in the ways that Reggie described, a selfless, sort of crafts-focused way, I think it changes the tenor of the conversation. So the liberation that we've gotten through social media, I just would never want to turn back from that, right? And it is but a new town square, right? So I don't blame the cobblestones for the brutalities that happen on top of them. That is human nature. And I think the degree to which we tell our authentic stories, and I think inclusion is the other extension beyond diversity, right? So I want to know what your story is, no matter who you are, and I want you to spend time making a good version of it that's entertaining and well-made. The degree to which that happens, you're too busy making your stuff that tells your unique story that you've come to terms with a crafts person's hand. I think that changes the tenor of the discourse and what those platforms can be, because they are ultimately just a reflection of who we are and of our willingness to put in the work. In terms of the current movement, I am exhilarated as often as I am heartbroken. I am a student of movements, and I am incredibly impressed by the speed with which this has evolved. And the the precise nature of the shifts in the narrative. So from week to week, I think it's a masterclass in leadership in the most difficult context and conversation we can have in this nation and around this world. And again,
it's 10 o'clock.
Sorry for that. Again, it's sort of the move across the world in terms of how this conversation is being taken up and dealt with in context around the globe. So as painful as it is, as wrenching as it is, I think it is the key to our liberation.
Wow, these are some really, really deep thoughts from both of you, and it's very good to hear. And I just want to know your perspective in terms of people's anger and people's sadness. How can they turn this creatively instead of just being sitting there upset or being there angry and just breaking things or crying? How can they turn their feelings into something creative, something beautiful that can still create change? Any suggestions that you have for creators for?
This is your Android, if you have one of those. Use it, right? Find an app that allows you to figure out how to use Final Draft. If you don't know what that is, figure it out. Figure out what a script looks like. Dive into your energy into learning and creating. So writing, shooting, casting, producing, directing, editing. I think if you're doing all those things, that creative outlet will allow you to channel the energy in ways that are constructive, but also ways that allow you to change the world.
What about?
Yeah, I think that's, sorry. I think that's great, Brickson. I think that's exactly what I would say. I would also say, it's sometimes it's okay to feel those feelings too, right? And so I think that we have to just honor how we're feeling. And, for many people every day, including myself, every day is different. So you have to figure out, but I found meditation and those things to be very helpful. But then I think, also in this sense of this call to action and wanting to do something, I think Brickson's right. Just create. There's, certainly you can start and just, put a pen to paper, or even if it's a journal that you're journaling in every day to begin your writing craft, right? And then go from there to the script or from there to whatever it is. But I think just the expression of the pain or the anger in itself in some written or visual form is actually really powerful. And I think, if you want to really delve into it, there are master classes, like literally master class, where you can watch classes from writers who can teach you how to do these things if you don't already know how to do them. But if you're already in something, I think Brickson's right. Pick up your phone and just create, and use this time as a real opportunity to get into a deep thought about something. And I think that once you start, I think people are really surprised at how it can sort of just grow from there.
And so I just want to know, in the current state of Hollywood, being that we're frozen a little bit right now and we're uncertain of what's coming in the future, what do you advise creators, whether African-American creators or minority creators in general? Do you advise them to stay in the Hollywood business or to look for something else? Because currently we don't know what's going to happen. It's a very uncertain time. What are some of your thoughts and advice to these folks?
Yeah, I think, sorry, Brickson, I'll jump back in here. It's hard for me I think what I would say is, like, if you're passionate about this business, then please stay in it, right? And I think the question just is how do you find your path? And we're hoping this entrepreneur series can be helpful in some ways for people to find their way through and navigate through all of these changes. And I think that it's really about figuring out how you can best utilize your skill set in this changed world. So the business was changing pre-COVID, right? So you were seeing fundamental changes in the forms of distribution. You were seeing consolidation amongst many of the bigger players. So there was already a bunch of change happening. What I think COVID did was accelerate a lot of that change. And so, we as participants or in this industry, we have to figure out how do we accelerate change in ourselves. So figure out where the business is moving and where does my skill set meet the business? And so if you're changing to a world of streaming and technology, how can you manifest your skills in a way that is relevant in that space? So what is going to be most impacted, I think, coming out of COVID is this production area, right? So there's going to be all of this pent up demand. Schedules are going to be crazy. Some jobs may come back, some may not. So if that's not the world you're living in, is there somewhere else that you can exist? Is there some other way that you can use your skill set outside of that space? Maybe it's in writing. If you've been a writer, maybe you produce. If you've been a producer, maybe you look to direct or something. It's about, again, figuring out in this new environment where you can leverage the skill sets you already have. And again, as we've talked about in this time, what new skill sets can you develop? So I would say, and I encourage everyone who's part of the business to try and stick it out, if they can. I think reality is often, at play in the background, but I do think there's opportunities coming out of this. And I think it's really just incumbent on us to figure out where we fit.
Thanks. Brickson, do you have any thoughts?
So tough. I mean, people got to eat, right?
Right.
That's the bottom line. And I think that, brilliant people need to thrive. And so I encourage people to first figure out that eating and then prioritize the thriving. And so, I don't want to foster anyone's heartbreak, but I think that there is a moment where you have to figure out again those fundamental needs. And so I think, as Pauline has described, the business will come back in very different ways. So I don't know that there is one shot at the opportunity and that just goes away forever, right? You think about people who launch their careers later in life, but eating is fundamental, right? And surviving is a fundamental objective. And so I think that taking steps that are maybe a few degrees away from the dream, but that fill those needs but give you a path back, may be a strategy. But again, I worry about our folks in this time who suffer in silence, and so want to make sure they're taking good care of themselves and their loved ones, and creating a space to be filled up with creativity. And so I think that has to be the priority. If you can't, being a starving artist only goes so far, right? And so you got to figure out the way to thrive, so that you have the runway to come back and create.
Well, I want to thank you both, Pauline and Brickson, for your great information, conversation, and especially your time. I know it's priceless and precious, and you spent it with us at Culture Focus magazine. Any other last words you want to share with us or leave us with, whether positive or anything?
Well, I just want to thank you for having us. It certainly has been, great to be here and be part of this conversation with you. We encourage everybody to engage in the conversation and to certainly visit us at the Blackhouse. And, we're wishing everybody, good health and good vibes, certainly.
Absolutely. I add my thanks to your platform and for you lending space for us on it. And to your readers and viewers, thank you for being with us and spending some time with us. And stay strong is my biggest message. It's just stay strong.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for these positive words. I hope both of you stay strong. The viewers and the readers stay strong and safe, especially with COVID. We don't know when it's going to end or if it's going to end. Let's hope it is going to end soon. So Thank you again, and best of luck in everything you do, and keep us informed of your endeavors.
We hope to see you soon.
We will. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.